Have you ever, like, stumbled upon something so fascinating you just had to tell somebody about it?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
That's kind of the feeling I got from this interview with Nate DiMeo. He's the creator of the podcast, The Memory Palace.
Okay, yeah, I know that one.
And he's also written this book also called The Memory Palace. And he's got this way of, like, bringing history to life,
Hmm.
like making it feel so personal and relatable.
Yeah, I can see that.
So today we're going to take a deep dive into his approach to finding these stories that evoke emotion and wonder.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about how this approach to history can make it feel more relatable and, like, even change the way we see our own lives.
I'm intrigued. Let's dive in.
Okay, so one of the things that really stood out to me in this interview is DeMeo's emphasis on the power of emotion in historical storytelling.
Right, like it's not just about the facts and figures.
Exactly. He's looking for those sparks of human connection, those moments that make history feel less like a textbook and more like,
A conversation with a friend.
exactly.
Yeah. He actually talks about this in the interview. He describes it as like finding a spark of something that changes your perspective.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, and he says it happens when he stumbles upon a story that suddenly illuminates something new about the past, or even about himself.
Hmm. And it's not just about finding those stories, right?
Correct.
It's also about knowing when to tell them.
Oh, interesting.
He mentions waiting for the right moment when he can connect a historical event to something happening in his own life.
Oh, so it becomes personal.
Yeah, or to a larger human theme,
Yeah,
something that resonates on a universal level.
I see. So it's like he's weaving together those threads of personal experience and historical narrative
Exact.
and creating this tapestry that's both intricate and relatable.
And you can really see this in the way he tells the story of Ruth Harkness.
Oh, yeah, the woman who brought the first panda to the U.S.
Right, he doesn't just recount the facts of her expedition. He makes you feel the weight of her grief over losing her husband.
And the determination that fueled her journey.
Right? The facts of the story. But hearing DeMeo talk about it, it's like...
It's like you're suddenly seeing the human heart beating beneath the historical event.
Exactly.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah, and that's what makes DeMeo's work so compelling. He's not just teaching us about the past. He's inviting us to feel it.
To connect with it on an emotional level.
Exactly. And speaking of unexpected connections, I was particularly intrigued by DeMeo's time as an artist in residence at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Oh, yeah. What about that?
He talks about this seemingly minor temple, the Temple of Dendur,
Okay.
and how it led him down this fascinating rabbit hole.
And what was it about the temple that caught his attention?
Well, it wasn't the temple itself initially. It was the fact that he was forbidden from calling it by its real name
Really? Why is that?
because of Sackler family.
Oh, wow. The Sackler family.
Yeah, whose name is now synonymous with the opioid crisis.
Yeah, that's a whole other story.
Let's talk about a twist.
Right. You don't expect to encounter that when you're studying ancient Egyptian architecture.
It's like this collision of past and present, this reminder that history isn't just something that happened long ago.
It's still unfolding around us, shaping our lives in ways we might not even realize.
And it puts DeMeo in this really tricky position, right?
Yeah. How do you tell the story of this beautiful ancient temple without ignoring the very real and painful consequences associated with its benefactor?
Exactly.
So what does he do? Well, instead of trying to force the Sackler controversy into the narrative of the temple itself, he decides to address it head on. He adds an addendum to his book where he dives into the whole controversy.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, and he highlights the activists who fought to remove the Sackler name from the museum.
So he's not shying away from the difficult stuff.
No, not at all. He's acknowledging that these uncomfortable truths are part of the story.
And that we can't just sweep them under the rug.
Right, it's about confronting them, grappling with them, and learning from them.
Exactly, and I think that's what I admire most about DeMeo's approach. He's not afraid to ask tough questions, to challenge the status quo, and to use history as a lens for examining contemporary issues.
It's a powerful reminder that history isn't just about memorizing dates and names.
Right, it's about understanding the forces that have shaped our world.
And using that knowledge to create a better future.
Now, in the interview, DeMeo uses a really interesting phrase to describe his approach to exploring history.
What's that?
He calls it a yoga practice.
A yoga practice.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
I think it's brilliant. It suggests that for him, history isn't just an intellectual pursuit. It's a way of engaging with the world.
Right, of finding meaning and perspective amidst the chaos.
He talks about how reflecting on the past, on the way lives unfold, on the reality of mortality, actually brings him a sense of peace and connection.
It's like he's finding solace in the grand sweep of history.
recognizing that our individual lives are part of something much larger and more enduring.
And it's a beautiful way of thinking about it. And it reminds me of something he said about wanting his stories to offer listeners a moment of wonder.
Especially amidst the daily grind.
Exactly like he's offering us a brief escape from the mundane.
A chance to step outside our own lives and experience the world through a different lens.
And it's not just about grand historical events, right? He finds wonder in the seemingly ordinary in the lives of everyday people who made history in their own quiet ways.
I love that.
It's like he wants us to see that history isn't just about kings and queens. It's about all of us.
The choices we make, the connections we forge, and the legacies we leave behind.
Now, speaking of human connections, there's this moment in the interview where DiMeo talks about feeling compelled to share the stories that truly move him.
Oh yeah, like he can't keep that excitement bottled up inside.
Right. He describes it as that feeling you get when you learn something amazing and you just have to tell someone about it.
Whether it's your spouse, a friend, or even a stranger on the street.
Exactly. It's that innate human desire to connect, to share our experiences, and to find common ground through storytelling.
And that's what makes his work so engaging. He's inviting us to join him on this journey of discovery.
To explore the past with a sense of wonder and curiosity.
And to find meaning and connection in the stories of those who came before us.
He's not just telling us about history.
Yeah.
He's making us feel it, making us part of it.
And that's a powerful thing because it reminds us that history isn't just a dry collection of facts and dates.
It's a living, breathing tapestry woven from countless individual threads.
And we're all part of that tapestry, whether we realize it or not.
Absolutely. And that's something we'll be exploring further as we continue our deep dive into Nate DiMeo's work.
Yeah, I'm excited to see where this goes. So, we were talking about how DiMeo finds these amazing stories and figures out when to tell them.
Right.
Well, one of the examples that really stood out to me was the story of Hercules.
Oh, yeah. The enslaved man owned by George Washington.
Right. And it's it really shows how historical research can challenge our assumptions and reveal these hidden truths.
It's a great example of how he finds those moments, those connections that make a story feel both timely and timeless. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
When he first told Hercules' story on his podcast, it was a tale of escape and mystery.
Right.
But then historians discovered what happened to Hercules after he fled Mount Vernon.
And that changed everything.
Yeah, it did. It's amazing how a single piece of new information can completely shift our perspective on a historical event.
And it's cool how DiMeo grapples with that in his work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He could have left the original narrative untouched, but
Yeah.
instead he chose to revisit the story, incorporate this new discovery and offer a more complete and ultimately more hopeful portrait of Hercules.
I love how he talks about the challenge of finding a new ending for the story,
Yeah.
one that honored the original while also acknowledging this newfound truth about Hercules' life.
Right. It wasn't just about tacking on a few new facts. It was about finding a new emotional core for the story.
And that new core really celebrates Hercules' resilience and his agency.
Absolutely.
It shifts the focus from him being a victim of circumstance to him being a survivor, a man who fought for his freedom and ultimately found it.
It's such a powerful message.
It really is. Like DiMeo said, yes, history can be brutal, but it's also full of stories of courage, resilience, and that enduring human spirit.
Yeah, and that brings us to another story that really struck me, the one about the Temple of Dender at the Met.
Okay, yeah.
And it's a story that's less about a person and more about the way history gets presented, how even seemingly neutral spaces like museums can become entangled in these ethical dilemmas.
It's like that moment when you realize the museum exhibit you're looking at is funded by a family whose fortune is built on something deeply problematic.
Right.
Suddenly that ancient artifact takes on a whole new meaning.
It really puts you in DiMeo's shoes, you know?
Yeah.
Imagine researching this beautiful temple, crafting this narrative about its journey from Egypt to New York, and then discovering you can't even call it by its real name because of the Sackler family's sponsorship.
Talk about a creative roadblock.
I know, right?
I'd be tempted to just throw my hands up and say, well, this is a mess. I'm moving on to a different story.
But DiMeo, he doesn't shy away from the challenge.
Right.
He could have tried to shoehorn the Sackler controversy into the existing narrative,
Yeah.
but it wouldn't have felt authentic.
Right.
So he adds this addendum to his book, a separate section where he dives into the controversy and the efforts to remove the Sackler name from the museum.
Yeah, it's such a bold move.
I know. It's like he's saying, hey, let's not pretend this isn't happening. Let's use this as an opportunity to talk about the complexities of art philanthropy and with the way history gets told.
And by doing so, he's inviting us the listeners, to think critically about the institutions we trust, the stories we're told, and the responsibility we all have to engage with the past in an honest and ethical way.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that museums aren't just repositories of beautiful objects. They're also spaces where power politics and ethics collide. And as visitors, we have a role to play in demanding transparency and accountability from these institutions.
Now, getting back to DiMeo's storytelling style, I think one of the things that makes him so effective is his ability to find those emotional touch points,
Right.
those moments that resonate with listeners on a personal level.
He talks about waiting for that spark, that connection to something happening in his own life or a broader human theme before he knows a story is ready to be told.
Yeah.
It's not just about finding interesting facts.
Yeah.
It's about finding the emotional heart of the story.
He does this beautifully with the story of Ruth Harkness,
Right.
the woman who brought the first panda to the U.S.
It's a story that could easily be told as a straight-up adventure tale.
Right.
But DiMeo focuses on the emotional depth of her journey.
Yeah.
He makes you feel her grief over losing her husband, the determination that fueled her trek into the Chinese wilderness, and the complex mix of emotions she must have felt upon finding and capturing Su Lin, the panda cub.
It's those details, those moments of vulnerability and human connection that make the story come alive.
It's no longer just about pandas and expeditions.
Right.
It's about resilience, loss, and the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity.
And I think that's one of the things that makes DiMeo's work so resonant. He reminds us that history isn't just about kings and queens, battles and treaties.
Yeah.
It's about people, their relationships, their struggles, their triumphs. And those stories have the power to move us, to teach us, and to connect us to something larger than ourselves.
It's like he's saying, look, history is full of amazing stories, but it's also full of stories that are just like yours and mine. Stories about love, loss, hope, despair, and everything in between.
And by tapping into those universal themes, he makes history accessible and relatable to everyone. It's not just for academics or history buffs. It's for anyone who's ever felt the sting of loss, the thrill of discovery, or the wonder of human connection.
Now, in the interview, DiMeo describes his approach to exploring history as a yoga practice.
Right.
I'd love to unpack that a bit more. What do you think he means by that?
I think he's getting at the idea that history isn't just an intellectual pursuit. It's also a way of engaging with the world on a deeper level.
Right.
It's about finding stillness amidst the chaos perspective, amidst the constant barrage of information and meaning, amidst the often overwhelming complexities of modern life.
It's like he's saying, hey, take a break from the news cycle, step away from the screen, and spend some time with the past. You might be surprised at what you find.
Exactly, and I think there's a real sense of solace to be found in history. It reminds us that we're part of a much larger story, a story that's been unfolding for centuries. It gives us a sense of perspective on our own lives, our own struggles, and our own place in the grand scheme of things.
It's like looking up at the night sky and realizing how small we are in the vastness of the universe. It can be humbling, but it can also be incredibly liberating.
And I think that's part of what DiMeo is trying to do with his work. He's offering us a way to connect with something larger than ourselves, something that transcends the boundaries of time and space.
It's like he's creating a space where we can step outside of our own lives for a moment,
Right.
breathe deeply, and just be present with the past. And in that space, we might just find a little bit of peace, a little bit of wisdom, and a little bit of wonder.
It's also about recognizing the beauty in the everyday, the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Right.
DiMeo isn't just interested in the big dramatic moments in history. He's just as fascinated by the lives of ordinary people, the small choices they made, the relationships they forged, and the quiet ways they shaped the world around them.
He's reminding us that history isn't just about kings and queens, battles and treaties. It's about all of us, the choices we make, the connections we forge, and the legacies we leave behind.
And those stories, however seemingly insignificant, have the power to move us, to inspire us, and to connect us to something larger than ourselves.
Yeah, it really makes you think, what stories are we telling right now that'll be in the history books?
I know, right? It's kind of mind-blowing.
It is, and it makes you think about those stories in a different way.
Yeah.
Like, what will future generations say about us, about the choices we're making right now?
Well, that's a question that DiMeo really grapples with throughout his work.
Yeah.
He's not just interested in the past for its own sake. He wants to understand how it shapes our present and how we can use that knowledge to create a better future.
He's challenging us to move beyond those simplistic narratives of heroes and villains.
Right.
And to recognize the complexities of human motivation.
The interplay of social forces and all those unintended consequences that ripple out from our actions.
And that's where his focus on finding wonder in the everyday becomes so powerful.
Yeah.
He's not just talking about those grand historical events.
Hmm.
He's encouraging us to slow down, to pay attention to the details of our own lives, and to find those moments of beauty and connection that often get lost in the daily grind.
He talks about how history is all around us in the streets. We walk the buildings, we inhabit the stories we share with each other.
It's about cultivating that sense of curiosity, that willingness to look beyond the surface and see the echoes of the past in our present.
I think that's a beautiful way to approach life.
It is.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of something much larger than ourselves, a story that's been unfolding for centuries and will continue to unfold long after we're gone.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Nate DiMeo's work, I'm left with this sense of hope and inspiration.
Me too.
He reminds us that history isn't just a dry collection of facts and dates. It's a living, breathing tapestry woven from countless individual threads.
And each of us has the power to add our own thread to that tapestry, to make our own mark on the world.
And whether those marks are grand gestures or quiet acts of kindness, they all contribute to the ongoing story of humanity.
So let's go out there and make it a story worth telling.
I love it. That's such a perfect way to end our conversation today. It's been a real pleasure exploring Nate DiMeo's work with you. And to our listeners, we encourage you to check out the Memory Palace podcast and DiMeo's book for a truly unique and emotionally resonant journey through history.
You won't regret it.
And don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations of fascinating topics.
We'll see you next time.